Hello and welcome to The Culture, the world's first esoteric festival. This is our channel. It's great to see you here, and it's recorded in the Marrakesh studio, so we say in Moroccan, Jujuka, something good come to you.
Today I've got John Parke in the studio. Hi John.
Hello there, nice to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. I want to talk to you about neuroplasticity and neurodiversity. Can you just take us through some of these concepts? Because I know you're a great conceptualist. You've studied a lot of things from Zen Buddhism right through to Edward de Bono, and you have really forged ahead in the 80s when other people were actually saying to you, why do you want this rolled out into education? Why are you presenting this? Now we've caught up with you. Tell us about it.
Okay, well, neurodiversity is a subject that's very close to my heart, as I'm a person who's dyslexic and dyspraxic and went through the kind of experiences of anyone growing up in schooling in the 1960s, 1970s, where these issues weren't really terribly well understood and were often interpreted in negative ways, being seen as a disability rather than a learning difference or a different mode of processing. I think in recent years there's been a lot more understanding and acceptance regarding people who are neurodiverse, and even an interest in the fact that some great innovators in art and science have come from a different mindset. Their frame of reference has come from a more neurodiverse way of looking at things and processing. So they've come out from an angle which has not fitted the current orthodoxy or paradigm, and sometimes they've been proved to actually be right. It's very difficult to, and more impossible really, to prove that some people who are historical figures who've been very influential were dyslexic. But for example, in Thomas West's excellent book In the Mind's Eye, he points to, as other people have, indicators that Leonardo da Vinci may well have had a lot of neurodiverse traits, and through the diaries and papers of Albert Einstein, that there were indicators that the way that he explored and arrived at things may have actually been enhanced by being a neurodiverse person rather than it being problematic. So what I'm really interested in is developing techniques that enable and empower dyslexic people to cultivate and use their neurodifference, if you like, their neurodiversity, to optimize it, to get really creative and good results, so that their learning difference doesn't disenable them, but actually becomes something that's really enabling and empowering. So that's where I'm coming from.
And this is fascinating stuff, and I can see already from the code breaker in the Second World War, he was definitely neurodiverse and could see beyond my understanding of figures and could probably see them in a three-dimensional way in order to crack the Enigma code. Some of these people are in a different place mentally, aren't they? Because
yes. Now, the neurodiverse community is by its nature very diverse. Obviously, dyslexics, dyspraxics, many people on the autistic spectrum. It's a family of relationships that often we have crossovers, but in different ways are very different. But just to give a little illustration that I think is quite useful, is that if we look at things historically, going back a few thousand years, I'm no great historian, but I believe around about 5,000 years ago, globally, organised farming in terms of people setting up homesteads and staying in a location and cultivating the land became much more common. Prior to that, we were more often than not hunter-gatherers. Now, there has been some writings and some research which have come up with the idea that I'm quite keen on myself, that a hunter-gatherer mindset would have almost a level of hypervigilance, because if you're going around constantly moving, foraging, looking for food, hunting animals, being exposed to dangers from predatory animals, dangerous plants, whatever, you're going to constantly, visually, sonically, sensorically, be on the alert for threat, danger and opportunity in order to survive. However, in a farmer mindset, which in a way is a more linear way of acting, because you know that you plough, you plant, you do this, that and the other, you may actually benefit from having a different kind of mindset. Now, what I believe is that in our present day culture, where we use reading, the alphabet, computers, all these things, and we look at the development of the phonetic alphabet, and obviously different cultures, Chinese way of writing is very different from our Western way, but it requires a very different mode of processing that is more linear and a different kind of recognition. Now, I think the kind of skill set that the hunter-gatherer mind has may sometimes find it actually difficult to be in an office, Western educational system, because the mind will be constantly inquisitive, curious, and looking around and using its creative imagination to anticipate or imagine other things or scenarios. Now, if we look at that as being differently abled rather than disabled, I think that's a far more constructive way of looking at it. So what my aim is with certain exercises that I've developed is to cultivate and make the most of that neurodiverse, more hunter-gatherer mindset, but also to become more neuroadaptive, so you can actually join up the dots so that that way of different mode of cognitive processing, as I see it, which may in some circumstances not be advantageous, that you can switch gears, as it were. So you can switch from the hunter-gatherer more readily to the farmer mindset, so you can work in the Western educational and Western work environment, but still have that creativity and that outlier quality. Someone who actually has a set of abilities or skills which may be extremely useful for innovation, and the phrase that comes to mind, thinking outside of the box.
Yes.
So I've gone on a bit there. So how does that sound to you?
Well, I know for a fact that you've mentioned that United Artists, for example, are working with Florence and the Machine to look into this, because they've realised at least 40% of the people that they're engaged with are neurodiverse. And this must be worth a lot of money. And I only bring that in because the workplace, why set people outside of what they can do when they can do it very well? And if you've got potentially Einstein or a very good musician or a very good architect sitting there who can't engage at the moment, why aren't we reaching out more to help them and take what they've got to offer?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head there. And not long ago I heard an extremely good documentary on the BBC World Service which talked about the work that Universal Records has done. They realised that a lot of their creative talent actually were on the neurodiverse spectrum, so they looked at how they could better enable them and create a more neurodiverse friendly and supportive enabling environment to optimize their skills and what they could produce. And they also found that quite a lot of their office staff were on the neurodiverse spectrum, and they interviewed one woman who had quite a senior management position, but actually said that prior to them adopting these neuropositive strategies, which changed the way the workplace worked, that she was spending too much of her time on tasks and things that she wasn't optimally talented at, and that now that they'd created an environment where there was more enabling technology to get the sort of stuff that wasn't her cup of tea, her forte, done, she was actually able to focus more on the things which she had exceptional talents and abilities for, so her value as a member of staff and her productivity went up considerably. So it's not a matter of being politically correct and nice to people and caring. That's good too, I'm all for compassion and all the rest of it, but it actually makes jolly good commercial sense. And
I'd imagine it's quite stress-free as well, because if a person's able to operate in their comfort zones, as it were, more effectively and see results, it'd be better for them, for their well-being.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that things that are neurodiverse friendly are good for everyone. They're just more enabling, often intuitive technologies. So it's not, as it were, slanting it to disadvantage. I don't like the word neurotypical because I don't think there is anyone who's totally neurotypical, but sort of more mainstream mode of processing. Not at all, because everyone finds the things. Often I've talked to people at conferences and things, and people who've gone along, some teachers and that, said, well, I didn't realise until I used this sort of technology that was more neuro-friendly how much it enabled me to get more done in a stress-free mode. So it's a totally win-win situation.
Now, John, you've been held back by people because you've been neurodiverse. Even in the early efforts that you've made to try and change how education looks at people and help people, you've been knocked back, haven't you? Could you tell us about some of that?
Yeah, on occasions. I wouldn't say, I'm not feeling I was victimised as such, whatever, but just a lack of comprehension of how different approaches and different things can actually be really useful for neurodiverse people and really useful for everyone. Many years ago, probably getting on for 30 years ago, I read Ellen J. Langer's famous book, Mindfulness, and she actually talks about dyslexic people and some work that she did with dyslexics, and the approach using techniques from the mindfulness mode of meditation. She approaches it from a very Western, non-spiritual way, but it's still the flexibility, the flow element that it brings in. And she later did an excellent book on mindfulness in education. And I remember at work, and when I was working in a college, actually suggesting, well, have we ever thought of looking at ways that we might teach students who are having a hard time a few little simple breathing techniques, a few mindfulness strategies to get them kind of in the zone, focused,
right,
and ready to do things. And often these were looked at, with a sort of wry smile, as if, well, this bloke's a bit bonkers. Yet now, in the last few years, the number of books on the use of mindfulness strategies in education and health and well-being in the workplace, and just generally, it's just gone completely mainstream. Yet
yes.
It was quite hard work even getting a hearing a few years back.
Well, we've moved on from there. Tell us about your latest work. What are you doing now? What are you working on? Right,
well, because of the kind of eclectic nature of things that I've studied over the years, I've done trainings in hypnotherapy, counselling, NLP, been to classes in proper traditional solid Zen meditation, things like that, which I found gave me a grounding. Also been in teachings in Tibetan Buddhism and things. And I looked across the spectrum of things, of mindfulness, different meditation practices, guided imagery, indirect suggestion, things like that, and tried to look to find commonalities, things that would cross over and could be integrated and drawn together. Also did a training in the form of eye movement desensitization routine, which is, if you may be aware of, is basically the movement of the finger backwards and forwards. An individual follows the finger, because when someone has had traumatic experiences and there are sort of mental blocks and things, it's been found that there's a co-relationship with eye movements and neurological activity, and there seems to be a way that by following the finger moving backwards and forwards, it's almost like kick-starting or resetting, getting a cognitive process to actually process the memory, put it in file, let it go, whereas previously it was highly emotionally charged and sort of causing an ongoing issue, which is what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder. That this method is very useful. I'm explaining that in a very simplified way because my angle on it, when I went and did a training in it, I found it very interesting and useful. But then subsequently, I read about the work of very brilliant man, Moshe Feldenkrais, and things that he did with people with damaged, someone who actually had an incredible amount of damage to his eyes and had lost his sight completely, and through a developmental set of exercises that had gentle incremental steps, managed to begin to regain a high level of his eyesight. So anyway, to get to the point here, I looked at all these different elements and I thought, right, what things here can usefully and safely be integrated that could help activate neurodiverse people's pathways? Because one of the things I think often happens is, I've been to many conferences and talked to many experts and different dyslexic, dyspraxic and other neurodiverse people over the years, and often people said, well, now and again I'm firing on all cylinders, I'm getting great ideas and I'm doing really well with my work or my art, and then it's gone, or it's not consistent. And what I'm interested in is what I call sort of joining up the dots, how to sort of kickstart or reset to get things sort of almost like, I look at it, sometimes I think of it, because I often think in visual metaphors, like an orchestra, but there's no conductor. So the exercises that I've developed are to help to develop a conductor so that all the different neuro elements, the dots are joined up and they're coordinated and working in a more systematic, on-demand way.
Is this something that any of us could do? I mean, are these simple exercises, or do they involve training?
They're incredibly simple exercises, and I think my approach to this is that what I say is very, very simple. Try it for yourself. Never expect too much, because I think one of the mistakes I've made in the past is that I've tried things and I thought, wow, there's going to be some huge change. It's a magic wand, it's going to be the magic pill that somehow enables whatever. And that hasn't happened. What's happened is it's taken trying lots of different things and finding lots of different bits and pieces that work to a certain extent and interlinking them together. So my approach to this is that the exercises are to loosen up and enable, but the attitude to have is one of curiosity, fascination and experimentation, because what tends to happen is it's nice and relaxing, and then you notice little incremental steps. That seems to be happening a little bit more smoothly. That's an interesting idea.
Well, it's interesting that you work with the eyes. I know that you've spoken about that before. The exercises that I did from an early age, I had prescribed, I should say, glasses, reading glasses, and I put off having those glasses for 30 years by using Gaylord House's eye exercises, because the eye's a muscle, and I began to work it out, and it increased my eyesight. I never needed glasses until I was in my 40s, when they were prescribed to me when I was 15. I'm just wondering, can you give us an example right here and now of something that you're working on now with the eyes?
What the approach that I've developed, and there will be recordings available in due course, quite soon in fact, but it relates to finding a nice quiet space where you've got a little bit of time to yourself and there are no distractions. So not unlike doing a relaxation exercise or meditation, and you could say it's a form of meditation, to then close the eyes, to let go of any muscular tension in the face, to do some, probably at least 6 nice deep abdominal breaths, so that with each deep breath you let out, you feel more and more release of tension. And then just simply a series of eye movements where you go up from left to right, either side, 6 times. 6 times one way, 6 times the other. It can be 7 or 8. It's not at least more than 5, just to get into a certain sequence. I do rotation, both eyes to the left, rotation then both eyes to the right, and I do what I call going up the stairs, to imagine that as you're looking up a staircase, so you're taking the eyes up in incremental steps up to the right, then up to the left, then looking more to the extremes. So if you had your eyes open, you'd be really focusing on your periphery vision, then half rotating up, half rotating down, doing that several times to the left, then doing it several times to the right. So you get the idea. It's a set of varied, simple eye movements, what I call neuroplastic eye protocol, to free up and get things going, because the work that's been done with other people in this area has indicated that the eyes obviously are very intimately related to what's going on in the brain,
of course,
neurological activity. So my assumption, I think there's a lot of evidence from people who have done a lot of research in different areas that's sufficient to warrant my faith in this, and it's more than faith, because for me it's more than faith, because my own personal experiments and experiences seem to have helped me a lot, is that you're actually stimulating neurological pathways that are underused or have fell into disuse, non-use, or other ones where perhaps there's too much going on, too much noise, they're overused, they've been over-relied on, so they're not so efficient. So it's a little bit like resetting or kick-starting the brain. So the brain, in some interesting way, and this is the wonderful thing about neuroplasticity, given a bit of stimulation, given the opportunity, the brain has an ability to heal and transform itself to a remarkable degree. So the other things I do with this for myself is I sometimes might make a tape where I use what I call process-based suggestions. And this is something I've learnt from hypnosis, guided imagery, autosuggestion, things like that. Now, when I say process-based suggestion, I mean not a suggestion where it says, you should, you ought, it will, it could. Not a direct, authoritarian, rigid suggestion. More, I would say, a creative idea, something which encourages curiosity. So saying things like, it's interesting how, you may notice that. So I leave it open, and it's just so that conductor in the orchestra that we've all got, we just need to wake her or him up and to cultivate them. That's when the conductor in your brain thinks, that's interesting. How would I interpret that idea? How would I use it? So that's why it's important with my process-based suggestions to encourage curiosity, attention, focusing on noticing little positive incremental changes and steps. And my word, it's certainly been beneficial to me, and I intend to very soon open this up to a much broader audience by making my recordings available.
Well, I can't wait to hear that. Thank you again, John. That's amazing. And I'm hoping you'll return to the show and talk a little bit about these things as they develop.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and I just hope I've given everyone enough information to get a nice idea about this methodology, and I look forward to talking to you once more.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Cheers, John.